I have just accepted Her Majesty the Queen's kind invitation to form a new government.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's fantastic to be back.
In this new era, we're taking a new approach.
It will be uncensorable and uncancelable.
We can't give in to those who say we can't do better.
That is a disgrace.
We can make the West great again.
The status quo is not an option.
Welcome to the Liz Truss Show. Britain's economy is in a doom loop. Energy prices are astronomical, even though net zero has been abandoned by pretty much everybody else. Huge damage has been inflicted by quantitative easing after the financial crash and COVID. We've also had human quantitative easing in the shape of mass migration, diluting economic gains, putting a strain on resources, and causing huge damage. Debt is rising and tax revenues aren't as high as expected because people are literally fleeing the country. Public sector salaries go up, public sector productivity goes down, and we could be heading for a fiscal crisis. Much as we'd like to blame the least popular Prime Minister in British history and his accomplice Reeves, the truth of the matter is the rot goes deeper. Britain doesn't have a viable business model. There's only a certain amount a country can earn from grift. The British economy has been financialised, deindustrialised and hollowed out. Lending has shifted from business investment towards property and consumption. Our key industries that should be the lifeblood of the economy are oligopolies, like energy, banking and communication. They've lobbied and got more regulation. It's now almost impossible for small businesses looking to get a loan or expand. High energy prices are killing any manufacturing that's not already dead. Cars, steel and machinery, all industries that Britain used to lead in. An industrial Britain that didn't benefit from the elite economic sectors like banking or law has been left to shrivel. Assets like pubs and restaurants in towns and villages are struggling. For years, the British economy has operated in the interest of the blob, of the public sector, the regulated corporations, and the elite sectors. They promoted net zero, DEI, and Keynesianism. Their powerful web operates internationally, in Davos, Jackson Hole, and Brussels. They're deeply embedded with and funded by China. It's no coincidence that Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, and Keir Starmer, both creatures of Davos, have been to Beijing in the last month or so, desperate for crumbs from President Xi's table. Until recently, it looked like these globalists were unstoppable, that they were inevitable. But now at last there's a pushback from President Trump, from Javier Milei, and from doughty Japanese street fighter Sanai Takaichi. Today I talked to Liam Halligan, Daily Telegraph columnist and economist. And as we're about to see here, future Permanent Secretary of the Treasury. Maybe. And Adam Brooks, pub landlord and commentator. We talk about the dire state of the British economy and what it will take to turn it around. Don't forget to subscribe to the Liz Truss Show if you aren't already. And please also subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, where as well as this show, there are Liz Truss Show extras on Mondays and Wednesdays. I'm joined now by Liam Halligan. Liam, is Britain on the road to an economic crisis?
I certainly think if we carry on the way we are, a fiscal crisis is a very plausible outcome. And I say that with a lot of regret. I'm not here to be a sandwich board man prophesizing doom, but we're borrowing, Liz, each month 10, 15, 20 billion pounds. And some months we're borrowing half or even more of that to pay interest on existing debt. Our debt interest bill, of course, is 100%, 100 billion pounds plus. It's more than twice what we spend on defence. It's more than we spend on schools. And I think there is a sense in global markets that the Brits, we don't have the biggest slug of sovereign debt, but our cash flow isn't great. And we've got a government, unfortunately, which after years of a Conservative government, which racked up lots of debt under the so-called austerity years, the national debt doubled as a share of GDP. But now we have a government who seems to be, which seems to be ideologically wedded to more spending, more borrowing, a bigger state as the solution to every single problem, perceived and otherwise. And that's why I think we're in a kind of ideological economic doom loop now, where we've got slow growth because of too high tax. The slow growth then makes the public finances worse. And the only way Labour responds to that, the only way the people at the top of the Labour Party can respond to it, because of the dominance of their left in Parliament and in their activist base, the only way the likes of Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Chancellor Rachel Reeves can and will respond to fiscal weakness isn't to look at the expenditure side of the balance sheet and even slow down the rate of growth of spending. It's to tax more and more and more. And now we're seeing all the Laffer curve arguments coming to the fore. We're seeing some wealth creators and others leaving the UK, very high rates of emigration now. And that is undermining our tax base. And I think a lot of people across financial markets, the big institutions, the pension funds, the insurance companies, the endowments, the sovereign wealth funds that lend governments serious money each month and year, they're now looking at the UK and saying, we're not sure that this adds up. And this isn't just surmise, this isn't just some newspaper columnist scribbling away. Look at our sovereign bond yields, Liz. For many months now, for the whole of last year, we were an outlier in terms of the cost of borrowing. And it's not said very often, and I'm sure that's much to your chagrin, if you like. It's not said very often that the whole of last year, the sovereign bond yield, the amount of money the government had to pay to borrow long-term money, was way above where it ever was at the height of the so-called Liz Truss mini-budget crisis.
By the way, it's the LDI crisis, and that's what economists talk about. It's the LDI crisis, and as we know, the Bank of England were very clear after the fact that it had been caused by the problems with LDI.
They were very clear in a rather obscure academic study that was buried on their website. I've never heard...
That's the way Wonk's very clear.
I've never heard anyone from the Bank of England stand up and give a speech. Yeah, Liz Truss, she's not all bad.
But they are the, well, in my view, they are one of the key architects.
Oh, absolutely.
Why we're in the mess here.
It wasn't only LDI. It was also, and very, very few people write about this, but it's a completely legitimate point to make. You know, a day or two before your mini budget with Kwasi Kwarteng as your chancellor, of course, the Bank of England decided that was the time to turn around QE and start their so-called quantitative tightening program, selling bonds back into the market just before a fiscal event, which they were clear, even though lines of communication weren't what they had been, but it was clear to anyone.
I would use the word non-existent,
yeah,
but yes.
It was clear to anyone that read the papers that you were going to have to borrow money, not least for an energy package, at a time when energy prices were extremely high due to, obviously, Putin's invasion of Ukraine several months before that. In the end, you didn't spend a lot of that money that you thought you were going to need for the energy package because energy prices came down. But why did they decide, of all the days they could have started, that was the moment to start doing active quantitative tightening, not letting the bonds run off like the Federal Reserve is and the ECB is, but actively selling bonds back into the market? I mean, some people would say that was an unfortunate coincidence, Liz. Some others might call it sabotage.
Well, quite. But going right back to where this all started, because we can criticise Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer, but the fact is the British economy has not been making its own way in the world for quite some time. And you could argue that even in the Blair years, a lot of it was quite illusory. And when the financial crisis happened, it turned out that a lot of Britain's economic growth had been built on sand. And we've been, over time, becoming less competitive in manufacturing, particularly in areas like energy, thanks to net zero. So you've got an economy that at a micro level is pretty stagnant. And it's hard now to survive as a private business. And in fact, a lot of the so-called economic growth that's coming, and it's like 0.1% or whatever, is actually growth in the public sector.
It's the state.
It's not growth in the private sector.
Borrow and spend and you'll get a bit of GDP growth, but at what cost? I think that's right. If you look at a table of the G20 countries from the year 2000 to the year 2024, if you look at per capita GDP growth, I think we're 19th in the UK, and that includes those Blair years when we were averaging 2, 3, sometimes even 4% growth. I mean, in Blair's first term, you did have 2, 3, 4% growth throughout, and of course Blair took on a fiscal situation where the national debt was 30, 35% of GDP after a lot of consolidation work and fast growth under the Tories. Ken Clarke's chancellorship, building on Lawson and all the rest of it. You know, your Conservative Party handed to Blair a really great economic legacy in terms of the fiscal position. The trouble is now you've got a bunch of Labour MPs who were advisors and hangers-on in that Blair government, you know, young thrusters, and they now want to come in and I want to spend lots of money like Gordon did. I want to be, you know, Gordon Brown is my hero, says Rachel Reeves. Well, that's all very well, Chancellor, but we haven't got 2, 3, 4% growth. You haven't got 30, 35% of GDP as a budget deficit. You've inherited from the Tories, you know, a not great economy at all, it has to be said, and you're acting like you're New Labour in a more benign environment. And that's what's leading to eyebrows being raised across the international capital markets about the extent of Britain's borrowing and how we're managing our public finances. I repeat, some months we're borrowing, the money we're borrowing, more than half, sometimes 2/3 of it, is going straight on debt interest, which is a Ponzi scheme.
It is all true. But the fundamental problem at the heart of all this is a lack of growth. Because if we had economic growth of 3% a year, these public finance figures wouldn't be a problem. The issue is we've had some absolute catastrophic policies, net zero being one, essentially closing down the North Sea, not fracking, not using the benefits of Brexit. It's so hard to set up a private business now in Britain and be successful. We're seeing people leave the country. It's the lack of the private sector that is the big missing element from Britain's economy.
I agree. It's the lack of dynamism, it's the lack of growth, it's over-regulation, missing the chance to properly deregulate after we left the European Union, as you rightly say, sky-high energy prices, a lack of infrastructure. And when you don't have that growth, your public finances look worse. And then if you're an ideologically left-wing Labour government, and crikey, this Labour front bench is so far to the left of Blair's front bench, and the Labour left in Parliament now is even more nutty and insane than the Labour left was in Parliament in the mid to late 90s. And Blair purged a lot of that Labour left, to his credit. He deliberately picked fights with them in order to, in the run-up to 97, in order to show the country that he was more of a centrist character.
He created the institutions
that
have now been affected by the left. So you've got, I mean, actually Osborne created the OBR, but the Bank of England, which he made independent, the governor now has an 8-year term. They're pretty much unsackable. What we've seen is it becoming increasingly Keynesian. And we saw massive QE after the financial crisis and also after COVID, which I think created massive damage in terms of things like asset inflation.
Of course.
So why is it young people in Britain cannot get on the housing ladder?
Yeah, a lot of it is QE, as I wrote in my book, Home Truths, all about the UK housing market and how unaffordable.
Has anyone listened to you?
I think there was a real concerted attempt under the Tories. So Michael Gove read the book from cover to cover, as did Kemi Badenoch when she was business secretary. A lot of parliamentarians have read the book and commented on it. A lot of civil servants have talked to me about it. But we're dealing with massive vested interests here. You know, the big oligopolistic house building lobby in the UK. It practices contrived scarcity. They want very difficult planning systems because it keeps the small and medium-sized enterprises at bay, makes it more difficult for them to compete. You know, before that global financial crisis you mentioned in 2008-9, 2/3, some years 3/5 of our, some years 4/5 of the houses built in the UK were built by companies building between 0 and 150 houses a year. So SME builders. Now 80% are built by the top 10 builders, and it is an oligopoly. It's lots of regional monopolies. They practice contrive scarcity.
It's interesting you say that, because essentially after the financial crisis, the oligopoly concentrated their hold on power. And that's also true in banking.
Yep.
One of the other big issues we face is if you're an enterprise, it's very hard to get bank lending these days. There's a massive credit squeeze
There is.
after the financial crisis. The banks weren't held to account for their failings during the financial crisis at all. Nobody was prosecuted. They got bailed out. Do you think that that sort of legacy is still there in terms of our politics?
I think we're like America was in 1890 before Teddy Roosevelt and the Sherman Act. What do I mean by that? I mean that capitalism has become corporatism. There's a lot of cronyism. A few big companies dominate so many sectors that are vital to the economy. I've talked about house building. You're talking about banking, and it's true. If you have a banking license in the UK, it is literally a license to print money. You should be lending. You should be intermediating. Savings and investment in British firms, preferably. But banks don't do that anymore. They don't think they need to. They're closing down all their branches. There are no requirements, or very, very few requirements put on them at all in terms of how they can practically assist ordinary people, depositors, and people starting businesses and employing people. Instead, they're ensnarled in loads of well-meaning, environmentally friendly.
It's well-meaning.
Tick box regulation. Is virtue signaling, isn't it?
Yeah.
Tick box regulation, which makes it very difficult for new entrants to come into the banking market. The licenses are very, very jealously guarded, and that applies across a load of sectors in the UK. We're lacking the incredibly powerful force of competition in so many sectors. You've got a lot of vested interests that love more regulation because it stitches up the smaller companies. They can't keep up with the regulation. They haven't got massive compliance departments, and that's showing in growth. And as well as over-regulation when it comes to growth, as well as too much taxation, which seems to be Labour's only answer to any problem, you've also got the rising cost of ordinarily employing people. You used to be able to employ somebody for 20 hours a week, a young person, without paying NIC, right? And so students, they could really do lots of paid work. They could fund themselves. It's good social mobility, a great way for them to get involved with the world of work and employment. Now you can only employ somebody for 8 hours before you have to start paying national insurance. Absolute lunacy by Reeves, not just to raise, as she did in April 2025, the headline rate of employer national insurance contributions, but being sort of clever, thinking she was like her great hero, Gordon Brown, by being really sneaky with the numbers, as he always was. She lowered the threshold where you start paying NIC from over 10,000 to 5,000. That, in order to have that kind of clever piece of spin, because she thought journalists would be too thick to understand what was in her policy. That cost ordinary workers at the lower end of the jobs market a huge amount, because that penalizes. It's anti-progressive, it's regressive. When you lower a threshold, it penalizes lower income workers more at the tight end of the labour market, where people are going to get those little part-time jobs that make the difference to themselves and their family. Reeves has deliberately penalised those very people that Labour says it wants to help. And you're seeing that now in the service industry, where people, so few employment intensive, service companies are suffering because the cost of employment is so high.
But this is, it is something that is now embedded in our institutions.
Yeah.
Now, I was a Treasury Minister for 2 years.
You were.
And what I saw was constant belief that you can raise taxes and it won't have any impact on revenue. It won't have impact on economic growth, that these are fairly minor things. The Treasury just talk to the big companies who actually don't care about some of this extra regulation.
They want it.
And
it's a business practice.
Treasury officials themselves are much more radical left than they used to be. And there was even commentary in The Guardian saying these people have a different attitude, because it used to be you went into the civil service to serve the government of the day. Now, if you go into the civil service, it's because you want to do good according to you.
Yeah.
And you are an environmental activist, or you are a sort of Keynesian economist, or you are a radical transgender activist. And that's what we've got in our institutions. So actually, the Chancellor is just ticking the boxes, but the decision making, a lot of the ideas, these are ideas that I've seen before. The things like cutting the winter fuel allowance, that was on the table, back in 2017. And what it is a mentality that is a Keynesian mentality that essentially it's government investment that produces growth. That it's not animal spirits of lots of different people competing in a market. That is their worldview. And that worldview is now being dominant in academic economics in Britain. There aren't that many right-wing economists out there, are there? Liam, you're a bit of an endangered species.
There are no monetarists, for instance, people that believe that the supply of money is important in determining the cost of money, i.e. the interest rate, on the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee. There were, when it was first set up in the late 90s, there were one or two, but now there are none. I remember when you were Chief Secretary of the Treasury, and I remember talking to you that time, and with respect, Liz, I think when you were Chief Secretary to the Treasury, it actually... It radicalized you in a way, in the sense that you saw stuff that I think quite shocked you.
Yeah.
Like exactly what you're talking about now. And I remember that period very, very well. And I remember you talking to me about it. And good job that you could trust me. And I didn't quote what the Chief Secretary of the Treasury was actually saying at the time, or you'd never have become Prime Minister. Maybe you thought, well,
I think partly I think the Treasury officials did not like what I had to say because I challenged them on monetary policy. I said, we don't have an independent Bank of England. They're meant to be operationally independent.
Yeah. And
the Treasury should have a view on monetary policy.
I agree.
And this was an anathema to these people.
And your idea of civil service as activist, I don't think that can be dismissed anymore by anybody who's being honest as some kind of conspiracy theory. It absolutely is. I mean, there are some Labour ministers complain to me about this stuff. They can't believe how set in their ways civil servants are. The extent to which
they're whinging about the FBR now in the Bank of England.
The extent to which departments are genuflecting to sort of civil servants in very gobby, frankly, civil servants in their 20s and 30s who think that it's their job not to serve the elected government of the day in an advanced democracy, but to impose their own will on the civil service. And they will do that, a lot of these people, even if they have to be really, engaged in subterfuge and not being even-handed. Even. And this is a major problem. And this reflects the fact that a lot of our schools and universities are now, almost opinion, monoculturally. There's no diversity of opinion at all. We've got loads of diversity of, gender, color, ethnicity. Great. I love all that. But how about diversity of opinion in our universities, by our big broadcasters, in our civil service? Because surely in a democracy, diversity of opinion is the most important thing of all. And yet there's none. And let's just think about what's going to happen in the UK now. Let's say, who knows who the next government is going to be, but if it is a reform government or a reform Tory, some kind of deal or whatever it happens to be, that's certainly what the opinion polls look as if it could be, with Reform being the biggest party. These guys are going to go in, and I think they're going to hit a brick wall. I know they're thinking about it a lot, but I think the civil service, there are lots of people in the civil service, including lots of senior people, including some permanent secretaries, who think it is their job to stop reform, right?
Yeah.
Now that is completely
they actually
outrageous.
Said that to you. Have you heard this from them directly?
Well, these are people I was, I'm now of an age, Liz, as you are.
At university with some of them as well. Yes, I know.
And I've known these people a long time.
Are you going to name names?
No, I'm not, because just like I didn't say to the world some of the outrageous things you said to me when you were Chief Secretary to the Treasury, which I could easily have done. But I can report that I know and see senior people across Whitehall, and I go back with them a long way. And some of and it's not necessarily their views. In some cases it is. In some cases it's just saying, look, my department or the department is so infiltrated, it's so set in its ways, it's so dirigist and rigid in its worldview that it doesn't matter who comes in in terms of political leadership, I can't see how we're going to get out of this situation. I mean, look at the public sector pension scandal, the billions of pounds that was
the rail along with BNHMS. I think that's the hardest thing.
And this idea that, the NHS, the best in the world, I mean, that's just insane. And now I have to say, oh, but there's lots of good people that work in it. And there are some, but there are also lots of people who work in the NHS who are really lazy and are out for themselves, and shoot me down for saying that. There are lots of good people in the NHS who work very hard, who go well above and beyond. But there is
the incentive.
There are lots of people on sick leave for years and years and years, and no one dares to touch them. And we need to have grown-up conversations about these things.
If people aren't accountable, if they can't be hired and fired, then that is what happens.
Yep.
Of course it does. It happens to the governor of the Bank of England. It happens to people in the National Health Service. It happens to civil servants because they can't be hired and fired by ministers who are accountable. And I just saw how rotten the system was.
So you want to move to a more American system, right? Isn't there a middle way between the system we have now, which is lots of entrenched career civil servants who can't be sacked? If a minister, you know more about this than me, but if a minister really shouts loudly, then they may be able to get a civil servant moved. They may be able to build their own team broadly within the civil service. But who knows? Then some Guardian journalist will email them and that minister will be, suspended for bullying. I mean, we've seen this 3 or 4 times. 3 or 4 examples.
Like a massive diversion of ministerial resource to be trying to change your organisation by subterfuge. And frankly, that's what I did when I was in various government departments, is make sure the right people are in right jobs. But it took an immense amount of energy, And you've also got the problem in Whitehall that there is not enough power directly under the Prime Minister. The American president has power over the budget through the Office of Management Budget. They have power over legal issues. They have power over the way departments are managed. That needs to happen in Britain. Otherwise, nothing will change. And my view is you need to bring new people into the senior civil service. If whoever gets elected in 2029 does not bring new people into senior levels of the civil service, nothing will change. Because there are some very good permanent secretaries, as I say, I know most of them, but they have been brought up in this system. They have spent 30 years under the kind of Blairite yoke. And we saw what happened for 14 years of Conservative government is, again, not very much change. So
we had 2 Blairites at the top of the government, didn't
you? Need to bring 2 people in. New people, sorry.
I think you do. And I think that's going to be very, very difficult, because I think the civil service, which knows where the bodies are buried, has, they can talk to the press anonymously with impunity. They can, hide behind their anonymity. I think they will resist very, very heavily. I think people in the civil service want to think that the shifting of politics we're seeing, the moving of the Overton window, reform, it's all flash in the pan, and at some point the country will come back to its senses and we'll have a nice sort of Labour Lib Dem coalition. I don't think that's going to happen after this government. I think there's a lot more radicalism to come, and I think the civil service are going to be left behind, but I don't think many of them are going to really care about that. I think they're just going to cling on to their sinecures, cling on to their state-funded cozy positions, and I think there is going to be sabotage by civil servants. I can see that happening. And
so, would you be willing to serve, Liam? Well, if a new Prime Minister said, "We want to appoint you as permanent secretary to the Treasury," would you accept the job?
Well, it depends who it was and what the situation was at the time. But I guess I've been knocking around politics and journalism for quite a while. And as you know, Liz, any politician who wants to talk to you.
That sounds like it.
Well, I'm not going to turn down the opportunity to change things if I get the opportunity, but it would need to be in the right context. And I'd need to be convinced that whoever was running the country were the right people to be running the country at that time. But you've known me a long time. I don't really like party labels.
But this would be a challenge of actually changing the bureaucracy.
Sure, it would be. And it's going to take a very it's going to take a very united, coherent group of talented people. And the danger is, as we all know, politics it can be pretty mad. And for a new government to come in, especially if it's a brand new party that's never been in government and has got no experience.
That might be an advantage.
Yeah,
though.
it might be an advantage. It might be an advantage. But in any government, there's all the internal dynamics, the internal politics of the party and its relationship with itself. But then you're going to have a really belligerent interface with the civil service and a lot of the media, it must be said. Because let's say reform, obviously they're polling like 30 odd now. I think in today's political environment where you have fragmentation, you have lots of 3, 4 and 5-way marginals going on. We're going to see this in Gorton and Denton later this month. It's very hard to look at a national vote share in an opinion poll. A reformer on 30, they're on 35, they're on 40, and then translate that into a sort of parliamentary majority the old swingometer calculations that you and I have grown up with. That was always an inexact science, and it's something that overseas people find difficult about the British political system, because the national vote share doesn't necessarily mean the parliamentary vote share, and sometimes it's very different. Look at the Lib Dems; they got
It's the same in America.
They got 11% of the vote. They got 11% of the seats.
Yeah.
Reform got 14, and they got 5 seats. Out of 650, it's nothing. But I think now, even more so than in the 2024 election, how do you convert a national vote share into a parliamentary majority? It's very hard. I personally think reform, if they want to be a government in their own right with a parliamentary majority, with all those splits and the fragmentation, the Greens and the independent Muslim votes and all the rest of it, obviously the right is split with the Tories, I think you're going to be looking at a 40-45% national vote share. You're going to need that to convert into a parliamentary majority. So I reckon at the moment the most likely outcome is reform get the most seats, but then they have to do a deal. And the only party they can possibly do a deal with are the Tories and the DUP. But there's no way they're going to do a deal before an election. But I think there's no way they can avoid on current polling to do a deal after.
Liam, thank you so much for coming in. It's been brilliant to talk to you. And I'm grateful that you are going to step up to help save the nation. Well, I'm joined now by Adam Brooks, who is the landlord of the Three Colts pub in Essex, and he's also a commentator. Adam, how is the pub trade at the moment?
We're hanging on. This Labour government are making it very hard to survive. Many good operators that I speak to are thinking about throwing in the towel. Our costs are going up. We had COVID. We've still got many loans. I still have a loan from COVID. We had the energy crisis, which my little pub, backstreet pub, I was paying £5,000 a month in electricity alone at one point. So we've got energy debts. And now our customers are feeling the pinch, the cost of living crisis. Our customers have got less money. Our bills have gone through the roof. So it really is about survival. And Rachel Reeves does.
I can't believe that. That's an outrageous.
Rachel Reeves, her 2 budgets have cost us so much money. 2 budgets, me and my accountant have worked out about 30,000 in extra costs just from the 2 budgets per year. It's unsustainable. And if people stop going to the pub, stop supporting their local pub, we're in trouble.
So you were saying there was an energy crisis, but as far as I'm concerned, we're still in an energy crisis because we've got the highest energy prices in the Western world. What is that doing to business?
Well, it's hard. So I've got a little backstreet pub, as I said, and I'm paying at the moment about £1,700 a month just for electricity. So about £500 for gas. That's, over £2,000 a month just for energy. And it really is unsustainable. The energy crisis, when it spiked to like £5,000 a month, publicans were putting in their own money just to pay the gas bill
Do people
or energy.
understand this is being caused by net zero?
I think so. Net zero has certainly drove up the cost of energy. I mean, the markets didn't help.
Well, I would say it's the number one reason because That's the reason we're not fracking,
Yeah.
is because of net zero and because of these environmental campaigners. We now know some of them were funded by Russia to stop fracking in Britain. But what I'm saying is, does the normal member of the British public understand that the reason that they're paying energy bills that are 4 times what they are in America is down to these policies?
No, because the media does not show that side. The media will push net zero like it's some saviour for our grandkids and their grandkids. So no, the average person on the street does not realise.
It's Germany, isn't it?
Yeah.
Being told that communism's good.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think people are beginning to wake up to they're just being told a load of lies?
I do. And you've got someone like Ed Miliband that will do silly videos, treat us like children, play his little guitar, and just spout absolute nonsense, a virtual signal that we as Britain are doing our part. I think we're less than 1% of global emissions, aren't we? And yet we have to be the front runner in this net zero madness. No, all people want now and are concerned about is feeding their children, going to work, getting their money, and living and surviving. They have no interest in net zero.
But people who are running businesses in Essex and construction industry, building industry, car industry, whatever, what are you hearing from them about what it's like in all of those businesses?
Look, I've got friends from taxi drivers up to multi-millionaire property developers, and everyone is feeling the pinch right now. And this Labour government seems intent on killing this economy. I was saying to someone earlier, if we'd run with your budget, I genuinely believe this country would be in a lot better place than it is now. You have to cut taxes, you have to gamble, you have to, strive and give people incentives to earn money. All this Labour government is doing at the moment is battering us, trying to take as much money as possible, giving our taxes to those that don't deserve it, which are many of the people that are coming across on the channel. We are funding the lives of foreign men in this country, and we're funding the lives of many people that are cheating the benefit system. I think I read something yesterday, we've got the highest benefit bill in the G7, or we allocate more money, something like 2.2% of our GDP to benefits. Is that right?
It's very high.
Yeah.
It is very high. And
Will that be sustainable?
a lot of it is on things like anxiety or depression.
Yeah.
So it's not really very measurable stuff that people are off work for. And this system's being created. Now, you very kindly mentioned my budget. But the reason I ran for leader back in 2022 was that all this stuff was happening under the Conservatives.
Yeah.
Admittedly, Labour have put the accelerator on bad economic policy, but this has been going on for some time. It was back in the 2000s when Ed Miliband was in the job of climate change secretary that he passed the Climate Change Act that handed all this power over. It was Gordon Brown who created tax credits, which I think is responsible for a lot of the welfare problems. It was Tony Blair and Brown who created the Independent Bank of England, who've been a law unto themselves in terms of all this stuff. So I don't think we've actually had a good business environment for 30 years.
No,
in
the
country.
Uni Party has systematically destroyed our economy over the last few decades. And they've done it under people's noses. So your party, I voted Conservative until 2019, my whole life. And I thought that yous were the party for businessmen, for aspiring to be better, to get on in life. But when you look back, that's just not the case. It's not the case.
Well, what I saw was that the party had been obsessed, or the people that ran the party were obsessed with Blair, and they wanted to be the heir to Blair. And also that the civil service got captured. And Blair created all these new things like the Independent Bank of England, the Treasury was given more power. But essentially you've got people who are ideologically left-wing in all of those jobs, and they have pursued the agenda, and Conservatives didn't reverse it.
Yeah.
So it didn't reverse the Climate Change Act, didn't reverse the Constitutional Reform Act, and that's why we've got the problem we have with our judiciary. They didn't reverse the Bank of England Act. So we are in this mess because 30 years ago, we had this Blair silent revolution, and I think a lot of us didn't really know what was going on, but it was partly an economic revolution.
So we're basically being run by the civil service and unions and organisations rather than our parliament and our MPs now. Is that
Correct?
Yeah.
We are. And those people, they have a groupthink, which is very similar to the Davos groupthink, the World Economic Forum groupthink, which is net zero is good, ESG is good. There's something a bit dirty about manufacturing. We don't really care about that. We're fine to just outsource all this stuff to China. You know, we're going to focus on service industries, etc., etc. And we're now in a situation where Britain just isn't earning its way in the world.
And we have a prime minister that would rather succumb to Davos than Westminster. It's his own words.
Well, he did tell us in advance when he was asked the question, do you prefer Davos or Westminster? He chose Davos. That should have been a screaming red flag
Well, some of
to
us,
everybody in Britain, shouldn't it?
yeah, some of us were screaming about it online a lot before the election, but obviously people didn't come out and vote. It's a horror show, this government. It really is.
So we know that there's been a capture of Britain. That we've got an elite who really don't care about what happens to ordinary people, ordinary businesses in this country. They don't care. Provided the civil service carries on getting more money, provided their mates like Dale Vince, you know, and his eco schemes get more money, they don't really care about what's going on. How can we convince the public that this change is needed and all this stuff they've been sold, like diversity is our strength, net zero, is a load of hogwash?
Well, I think people, I hate this term, but people are waking up now to that they are just a number. They're not thought of as people. I've always said no government is your friend, and this one certainly isn't. But I think the opinion polls, and when you go out, and I speak to a lot of people in the pub, I go out and speak to people in the street a lot of the time. And now a lot of people, where they recognise me from being on the telly, they come and tell me, oh, we've had enough of this.
What are they going to do about it though, Adam?
Well, at the moment,
that's the question.
At the moment, the choice is going to be, you know, we're going to have to put our trust in reform at the next election. If you believe the polls, if you take what I get when I go out and talk to people, is that we have to try and break this uniparty. And it's in the hope that reform can rip up some of this civil service power and change us as a direction, change course of action, and hopefully start to prosper again as a country. Because at the moment, all I can see is businesses closing, record unemployment, and seriously, people are getting depressed. People that I've looked up to in my life are saying enough is enough, we're off. You've got people moving to Dubai, got people moving to Spain, Portugal, because they've just had enough, or they think that their family is in danger here. You know, the crime. There's not a lot I can tell you that is positive about Great Britain right now. And that's a depressing thing, because I've always loved this country, but I've got 3 kids and I've got to look after them at some point. And if things spiral out of control and get worse, it's my duty as a dad to take them away from that. So, you know, it's not going to happen under this Labour government. They're not saying the right things. They're doing the opposite to what is good for us as people. And I think people are waking up.
But are people prepared to have the battle, like the disruption? Like we saw the pushback there was when I tried to do some really not that massive things, getting fracking going, not raising corporation tax, dealing with IR35. This was not the biggest budget ever, but they made out like it was, and they blamed me for failings of the Bank of England. We will get that on steroids in 2029 if a radical government gets elected. And the mainstream media will pile in with all the normal, you know, shroud waving Armageddon. Do you think people are prepared to tough it out?
The mainstream media has lost a lot of its power and its control over people in the last, certainly 3 years. I'm on GB News, you've got GB News Talk TV, you've got...
We just heard that GB News is like constantly Ofcom in their ear saying there's stuff they can't say. They've got to have left-wing people on.
Look, I've never been told I can't say anything on that. I've been there 4 years.
Maybe you're not being bold enough.
I'm quite opinionated, and I think, viewers might think I am maybe one of the more bold on there. But what is good is that you're getting different opinions now. The mainstream media used to just feed us what we should know, how we should think. And that's not the case anymore. People are going to independent journalists. There's some great ones out there with huge followings. They're watching GB News, they're watching Talk TV, they're watching different outlets and making their own mind up now. Whereas, 10, 15 years ago, you thought how you were told to think. And I think in the next sort of 3 years, that's only going to get stronger. So I think people are prepared to be more radical, as you say, and maybe to tough it out for a couple of years if it means ripping up what has destroyed this country for the last 20 years. As you say, it's my opinion that Tony Blair orchestrated the downfall of Britain. I really do. I think he's the worst prime minister that we've ever had. And probably, in my opinion, the most evil. Because I think he knew exactly what he was doing. And a lot of the problems that we now face in Britain are because of Tony Blair. And I've got friends in America that are within politics that say you are still being basically governed by Tony Blair. His institute has so much influence on your politicians. Is that correct? Is that a fair summary?
Well, what I think it's more that he changed the system. So we now have Blairite placemen in the quangos, in the civil service, in the media, and they are pretty powerful.
Yeah.
That's the issue. And they're internationally connected. We saw the same with Clinton, Obama, the way they had placemen in places like the State Department who sabotaged Trump's first term. This is now the left-wing playbook.
Yeah.
They're not prepared to just have a normal argument, have an election, there's a decision. They want to just take over the institutions.
Yeah.
And that's what they've done. And I think is more obvious actually in things like foreign policy, and we've seen what they did on the Chagos Islands. But it's less obvious on economics, but it's at least as important that they have done that, and they have created a groupthink where in the Treasury, if you think different, or in the Bank of England, you think different, you won't last very long.
No.
And that's what they've successfully done. And it's throttling our economy.
And they've got the power to move markets to maybe influence policy or make politicians step back from policy that they want to get through.
Correct.
Because, they force, the market forces a trend.
There's the IMF, there's all of the people at Davos. You've now got a Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who's the governor of the Bank of England, who propagated a lot of this stuff like net zero, who did quantitative easing. He's now running Canada. What's he doing? He's going over to Beijing to kowtow to President Xi.
Yeah, look, I think it was pretty obvious. This is just my opinion as someone that's interested in politics and sort of involved in it on the sidelines, that a lot of what you wanted to do was sensible, common sense, and would have improved this country. But the markets were either told or forced to move in a direction so you couldn't do that.
But also they were concerned about what the Bank of England was doing. The Bank of England had failed to regulate the pensions industry. That's what caused a lot of the spike. But because the Bank of England have that market power, they were able to shape the narrative, even though it wasn't true. And that's what we see a lot. And we've seen it about net zero. I mean, it's so obvious that net zero, not fracking, is costing British people huge amounts of money. It is killing industries like the car industry, it's killing the steel industry. But will you ever hear that? No, you won't.
No. And we're sitting on such great resources around this little island, oil, gas, and yet we're importing it, to tick a box, not to pollute or not to go against the set narrative. And all that is doing is harming the good people of this country. As you say, higher bills. We're risking blackouts in the future.
What we need to do is give people hope that in the future we will be able to have cheap energy again. We will be able to have low taxes again. It will be easy to run a business and it'll be an exciting place and that's not going to happen under Keir Starmer.
No.
But that vision needs to be out there.
Do you think that could happen under Nigel Farage?
As I've said, the most important thing is that the blob is defeated.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really matter he's in number 10 if you've got the blob still pulling the levers. So to me, that's why it's very important that people in Britain understand what's wrong.
Yeah.
Because they've been told all kinds of lies, like it was Brexit or it was Liz Truss or whatever. I mean, that's the most ludicrous thing a lot. But they've been told all these lies about why we're in such trouble.
Yeah.
And they need to understand where it started, who's responsible, and what needs to happen to change it. Thank you very much, Adam, for coming in. Thank you. The road back to economic success is going to be a hard one. Probably things will get worse and there will be a crisis. In order to recover, energy dominance is central. We will not get reindustrialization in Britain without cheap energy. We need to unleash the North Sea, get fracking, and go nuclear. This will turbocharge core industries like steel and new industries like AI and crypto. We're part of the packed silica. We also need to exploit our critical minerals. Britain should deregulate and throw off all of the EU laws, lower taxes, and become competitive again. In order to do this, Britain's economic institutions need an overhaul. They need to be made accountable again. Senior officials need to be replaced and the globalist mindset weeded out. The umbilical cord to the EU and the World Economic Forum needs to be cut. This is the path Britain will have to follow. Otherwise, it's going to be more doom and more decline. To hear more about how we can change Britain, you can listen to my audiobook, 10 Years to Save the West, wherever you get your audiobooks. Please subscribe to The Liz Truss Show on YouTube. And also please subscribe to The Liz Truss Show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, where as well as this show, there are the Liz Truss Show extras on Mondays and Wednesdays. Thanks for tuning in.